Hey everybody, it's Kathy Bosco from Rethink.fm, the forward-thinking podcast about experience design. Join me and special guests to discuss effective design, technology, and the intersection of helping people and entrepreneurship. From user experience research to product roadmaps, we've got you covered. We've all got questions, so let's get started. Today, my special guest is Pavel Samsonov. If you're a member of our global design community, you may know his work and his writing. He publishes a newsletter called Product Picnic. Go subscribe today. It's important work. I'm very grateful to be able to amplify his message as we recorded this episode. Welcome, Pavel. I'm so glad you're here. Big fan of your newsletter and especially some of your recent articles about design and decision-making and the purpose of design. Thanks for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My career has been kind of interesting, and the way I see design has been kind of interesting as a result. If you've seen my title on LinkedIn or kind of like when I, go to talks, you'll see I call myself a problem designer. And in a world where people think that the question, how do I pivot from UX to product design makes sense? People get confused about that. I've never thought that question makes sense. I've never thought that there is a consistent enough definition of UX design or product design that you could change from one to the other and have that correspond to a consistent meaning of like what that actually means to other people. I just decided to call myself something weird and fun because for me, in my experience, the biggest point of leverage the design has and the biggest opportunity for us to really steer the conversation and insert value into the process is the problem scoping. It's the definition. And I've spoken to designers who don't agree with that, and they say that the product manager defines the problem and we define the solution. And I think that is a very strange, giving up ground for no reason. And I think that attitude is part of why we are in a very strange place today. I've been a product manager. I've been a consultant. I've been a UX designer. Did a little bit of front end development. I was not particularly good at it, but I can type the words into the thing and it loads in the browser, and some of that code is still live today. So I think that counts. And currently, for the next little while, I'm doing design education at Nielsen Norman Group. So once again, a different job, but it's been interesting because it's helped me really refocus my discipline from like what am I doing to how do I articulate it to a different person, and it's a completely different challenge. So it's quite exciting to kind of have that new perspective on this field.
Yeah, that's an exciting transition, but like I could see how it probably still feeds your desire to be a continuous learner, because when you're writing, you're learning, when you're teaching, you're learning, when you're working in the problem space, you're learning about people's current experiences and how they might be better. So I could see how that would be a really fun thing to do if for a while, maybe forever, who knows?
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where I think reflection is something missing from a lot of our practice. And if you think about the design process, it's a feedback loop. It has to be a feedback loop. I think a lot of people lose track of that because it's pictured often as the double diamond, which is linear. You do this step and then you are done this step, and you do this next step and then you are done this step, and so on and so forth until, oh yeah, we finished, we created innovation or whatever it is. And I don't think that makes any sense for how we think and how we work. And in practice, you get this roadmap from your PM and you're like, hey, we're going to go down the roadmap, and then we need to finish all the features we've promised our stakeholders. And you never really get an opportunity to look back and see, is what we're doing actually working? Or how can we evolve the process in the same way that we evolve our product? And getting an opportunity to do that within your work, within your company, is often really difficult because it's not structured. It's not something that's encouraged or rewarded, and you kind of have to do it on your own time. And so for me, writing is that exercise. It's an opportunity to put my thinking together and organize my perspective on what makes sense. And it turns out to resonate with a lot of people. And I think that if you try to kind of skip that and just focus on doing the work, you're going to quickly back yourself into a corner where you only have one way of approaching every single problem. And it's just like that's what you do. And it's going to be very difficult for you to adapt to different problems. You're kind of turning yourself into a hammer, and you're looking at essentially a lot of different nails. There's an expression in Russian that I think fits this even better. It's called driving in nails with a microscope. And so I think designers really are more like a microscope than they are like a hammer. And a microscope, it's got quite a heavy base. You could drive in nails with it. It would actually work quite well. It's just that it breaks all of the delicate glass lenses inside of it. And that's kind of what we are doing to ourselves as a discipline, unless we take the time to reflect on whether or not what we're doing is actually working for the definition of working that we prefer. Because it's very easy to say, well, I am really fast at producing outputs. I produced, so many mockups and so many prototypes in this many weeks. I feel really productive. But is that what you want to do? Is that the best way for you to create value? In a lot of cases, the best thing you can do is honestly assess a proposal for, a problem space or a solution and say, why would we do this? Like, no one should be working on this. It doesn't matter how quickly you create this product, because the product is going to be not very good, and it's not going to be very valuable to users. It's not going to bring value to the company. And so you can just cut off that entire branch of things you would have otherwise been working on. And you were actually much more productive because you found out it was a bad idea, weeks and months ahead of when you otherwise would have been able to do it. So I think that the writing that I do and kind of these the educational materials that I'm working on really kind of help me think about it more in those terms, that the process is a product. It's the same thing. You can use the process to improve the process. And one of the things you need to do is figure out what you actually want to achieve. What's the goal? Not just an output metric, but actual outcomes that are inherently valuable. And I think that every designer needs to figure that out for themselves. There are people, production artists, who are really good at that outputs, and that's what they want to do. And you can go to a consultancy, you can get paid to do that, and you can just walk away and you don't care about the outcome because that's not how you make your living, and that's totally fine. But a lot of designers who don't have that conversation with themselves and never figure out that's what they want to do, they put themselves in a role where that's not helping and that's not how they create value. And they ultimately kind of end up sabotaging their own success because they're trying to do something that's not a good fit for the expectations of that role.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I spend a lot of professional time helping teams achieve a more proactive or less reactive and more strategic aspect of their practice, because they're frustrated having to be reactive. They feel unheard because they're entering the conversation too late in terms of what should we be shipping and why. And I often see organizations just so busy shipping that they never take the time to measure the outcome. Did we achieve it? Did we not? Do we need to iterate? Was it a mistake? Like, all of that just gets pushed aside unless someone takes ownership of it. And I do agree. I think strategic designers and especially researchers can be the owners of that with their team, with the PM, because ultimately everyone wants to have a successful outcome. They want to create good experiences for customers, but they're getting forced into shipping things with a lot of risk associated with them, right? So decision making. And that takes us back to that your recent article. I think you probably got a lot of buzz. What was the impact of your article? And I'll put the link in the show notes. The name of the article is Design Struggles to be Born. And it's really interesting how you're framing design as the decision-making toolkit. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of the article and your thinking about design as a decision-making toolkit?
Of course. So the article, it was an issue of my newsletter, which is weekly, and it's not necessarily just of the last week's links. I have a long list of links that I collect, and basically when a theme sort of forms itself, it's when I write about that theme and I put in those links kind of as evidence. And one of the things I like to do, and it's just because of kind of my media diet, is link to a lot of social media. Like, what are practitioners talking about? What are people saying, as opposed to thought leaders and other article writers? And this is a theme that I've seen for a very long time that really reflects what I've been seeing in my work, as well as what clearly other people have been seeing, which is that there used to be design thinking, and I think design thinking is kind of misguided in a way, because the way it's been pitched to stakeholders, since the mid 2010s or whenever it became popular, was you can think like a designer, but if you employ designers, that's not really a huge value add. You can just go to the designers and have the designers think. And by saying anyone can now think like a designer because they've got these frameworks, you're actually undermining the ability of design to create that impact, because people will now think, well, I did design thinking, we did the workshop, we did the process. We don't need to involve these designers in the strategy anymore because we did it for ourselves. And I see the same thing echo now with democratizing research. And I've written about that before too, where when you quote unquote democratize a research practice, you have now cut off one of the most essential functions of research, which is centralizing knowledge into one consistent and shared understanding of reality. If you have, 10 teams and they're all democratized and they all do their own research and they all talk to different people and they have different, interview scripts and they get different data back, they've now constructed 10 parallel realities. And it's really difficult to have a strategy that spans all of those groups, because they're going to tell you, well, we did research and it doesn't match up with what you're telling us. So in the same way, I think design thinking kind of created this separation between doing design to make decisions and doing design to kind of deliver the outputs. And for me, it's a feedback loop. I've written about this a very long time ago. When I first started long form writing, which would have been 2023, one of my first articles was Design is the Art of Being Wrong Safely. And the reason it is the art of being wrong safely is because it needs to be a feedback loop. You can't separate thinking and doing and do the thinking once and then do the doing once. It has to feed back into itself, and it has to do that very quickly, because you need to be able to do that iteration to arrive at a good outcome, a good solution. And so when I was seeing these pieces come out and people share their experiences and thoughts, it really kind of clicked in my mind that okay, this is happening. This is a major shift that people are now talking about. I'm going to stop evangelizing, because evangelizing is only really useful when it's new. I don't think there's anyone out there who hasn't heard the message that design is not just about outputs, not just about visuals. The problem is not that they don't hear us, they don't care. There is a entrenched opinion, even among a lot of design practitioners, that what we do is visuals. And they're not going to listen to someone and just say, okay, cool, you changed my mind. It doesn't really work that way, because the perspective of what each role does is now embedded into the way that the org is structured and the way that the process is structured. And all of the people making the decisions are all the way, on the left. And then they say, well, design is going to work 2 weeks ahead of dev to, make the mockups and attach them to the Jira ticket. And then dev is going to take that in their 2 week sprint and they're going to deliver the mockup. That's not design. I mean, that's not even agile, really. But it's also not really design. It's I don't even know what to call it. It's kind of silly.
It's a workflow of sorts.
It's really just waterfall, to be honest with you. It's waterfall with extra steps. And so seeing these people stop emphasizing the distinction between, well, there's design and there's things that are not design, and we are special, and only we speak for the user. All of that has been tried for 20 years. No one cares. You need to speak the language of the people who make decisions. You need to make them understand what you're talking about. And I've written about this in the newsletter several times on the topic of taste. If you come to them and you tell them, I have great taste. As a designer, my taste is awesome. So therefore, for example, you need me if you're generating AI, interfaces, because I can come in and I can tell you if this result is good or not. If you tell that to an executive, they will laugh at you, probably in your face, but definitely later, with their buddies. That saying only I have taste is laughable. And they're just going to say, well, it just sounds like it's your opinion and you think your opinion is better than my opinion. Well, I think my opinion is better than your opinion, and I'm the one paying your salary. So you are going to do what I tell you. And people get really frustrated and they say design is dead. Design is not dead, because that's not what design ever was. I think that the entire kind of concept of, oh, my taste is really good, it's so overblown. We're seeing it now with things like liquid glass, which is an accessibility disaster. Apple designed really good taste. Well, look at what is done. This is not the first time Apple's done this either. iOS 7 was horrible. And they had to backpedal a ton of what they did because it was just very difficult to use, but it was very tasteful. It was people with really strong opinions about what good design looks like made that interface, but they didn't have a very good understanding of how it works.
Right.
And so,
and the downstream impact of the work is mentioning accessibility. Like should be a high priority. If it's not secure and reliable and accessible, it's really not usable. So why would you even promote that, right?
Yeah. And I think that's really where this kind of new generation of practitioners is creating value. They're starting by talking about, well, forget design for a second. What do we want to achieve? And I think there's actually a really interesting parallel between what they're doing and this is going to sound extremely surprising, and everyone's going to be like, what? No, but sales, especially enterprise sales. And everyone's like, what? But I was at AWS for 5 years, and they made me do all those sales trainings. And every single training, every single time that a new AWS service comes out, which is like every month, it always starts by telling you, don't go to your customers and tell them about this service. If they ask you about this service, don't tell them about the service either. Ask them, what are you trying to achieve? What is your goal? And it's like so shocking to me that the perspective of designers about sales is, well, these are the people who just want to, hit their quota and they want to go and they want to hawk the latest widget. And no, in my experience, sales wants to establish a long-term relationship so that, in the long run, they can sell more widgets. But the best way to sell the widgets is to help the customer do what it is they want to do and give them a solution they recognize as fitting that use case. There's a guy, Rob Snyder, he's very active on LinkedIn, and he's a sales guy. But if you read any of his posts, and you have any background in user research, you can instantly recognize that he is talking about user research. He is talking about understanding what your customer is trying to solve, not just a pain point, not just a need, but an unavoidable need. What is the thing they must do? It's not a want, it's not a should. For example, legal compliance is a great example. You don't have a choice. You're either Al Capone or you're complying with those laws in some way or another. It's most likely tedious. It's most likely time consuming. The process is going to be terrible. That is exactly the kind of thing where a good enterprise product comes in and solves that problem. It smooths out that experience. And if a company has a choice to spend their budget on a must-have tool that solves this issue they have to deal with, or a tool that sounds really cool and is, revolutionizing everything in general, but nothing in particular, they are going to pay for the boring legal thing because it solves a problem that is always on top of their mind. And so I think that one of the things that this kind of new design needs to be able to do is learn from analogous domains, learn from these groups that are valued, that are recognized as, profit centers instead of cost centers, and speak their language and adopt their ways of interacting with the organization as their touch points in a way. It's really service design at that point. How do you interact with your org? I think a lot of designers, by acting in a way that they separate out design, they say, oh, design is a separate thing. Design is different from what you do. I'm going to go off and do design by myself now. And you can't, look at my process, and you can't touch my Figma until I'm done with it. You're isolating yourself from the opportunity to make any kind of strategic decision or influence any kind of decision. And you're making yourself sound like a delivery function. Because to a business stakeholder, what you're talking about sounds like what an engineer does. Is you go off and you bring back a thing that they can look at. But you need to engage them in that process. And yeah, it's going to be hard. They're going to have opinions. They're going to disagree with you. They're not going to really care about, kerning and white space and all those things. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It means that now is not the time. And aligning the stakeholders before they see a single visual is a major part of what I did at AWS. We worked with customers of AWS. So, not people using the services, but like massive companies that make huge deals. And they're like, we're going to spend billions of dollars on your product. How do we make sure that we are, doing it right? And what we do is, well, you can build, something that looks exactly like what you already have and works exactly like you already have, but it's optimized for the cloud. And you'll save a couple of bucks. But the biggest value comes from behaving like a cloud native company, behaving like a company that can iterate and can, spin something up quickly, spin up an experiment that costs very little to do, and then learn from that and then throw it away, because the thing that you wanted from it was the learning. It wasn't the product. The product may not have been sustainable in the long term. It may not have done a lot, but it will teach you enough to build the thing that actually does what you want it to do. And it costs relatively little compared to the very kind of on-premise waterfall approach where you just have to sit around and estimate. And you estimate how many servers you'll need. You'll estimate all these features you'll need, and you go and do them. And after a year, you've done your, version 1, and you release it, and it's horrible, and everyone hates it. And then you plot a version 2, and it's a terrible old-fashioned way of doing software development. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we were pretty good at, I think, is bringing design in as a strategic function to the very beginning of that process, where our customers, these companies, come to us and say, hey, we want to do something new. And very often, that was the extent of their problem space. It's like, here's the industry we're in. We want to do something new. And they were the industry experts. They didn't go to SMEs in, whatever banking or finance or logistics or any of those things because they're already SMEs in that space. They came to us as innovation specialists, as design specialists, and they said, we need your help to learn, to understand our customer so that we can, use our expertise to build the right thing for them. And I honestly think that that is kind of the direction design ought to be headed in. And in some places it is. And in some places, they're starting to recognize that it's not just a consulting function. It's not a one-time, you go and you do this and you do the workshop and you come out of the workshop and then you suddenly have the ability to pivot your entire business in some direction. Because that's the dream design thinking sold you. And I think that it's kind of like, the old fairy stories where you're transported to the other world and, you eat and drink the magical fairy foods and then you come back and 10 years have passed and you're the same age and you're back in the real world now. And the real world looks so, drab and sad and colorless, but, everything feels like it was a dream. And it's kind of like, that's what a lot of these workshops are like, because they don't actually engage with the realities of every day. Yeah, you have to deliver the thing that was asked. You have to follow the roadmap. You need to drive change both top down and bottom up, or it's not going to stick. And so I think these companies are starting to realize that if you want this change to stick, you actually need in-house people. And I think there's a lot of ways that this manifests. One of the ways that I don't think it works well is if you have kind of the classic, head of design comes in and builds out a big, design org separate from everything else. And, the designers go and they're embedded into different teams and they try to set up a separate kind of like metrics, separate success criteria for design compared to the product. And ultimately, at the end of the day, people are going to say, well, design is an extra. So what is the return on investment we're getting? What's the ROI of design? And no one asks that for product managers because the product manager is embedded into that team. And at the end of the day, the product manager is evaluated by the success of the product. And so I think that in a lot of places, the way that this kind of approach has been successful is through integration, is through a lot of the time, designers who pivoted to become product managers. A good example of a person who knows what she's doing is Ha Fan. She's at Zillow now, I believe. And she used to be a designer, became a product manager, has bounced between managing and IC work. And so I think that degree of perspective is almost kind of what you need in order to be able to drive strategy from wherever you are. Like, at the end of the day, I don't think the title is what matters. I don't think that a person can come into the room and kind of put their feet in the table and say, hey, I'm a product manager. You got to listen to me. I was a product manager for years. And let me tell you, no one listened to me. The way that you get people to listen to you is you build influence. You can build influence as a designer. You can build influence as a janitor. You don't, it doesn't matter what your title is. What matters is you talk to people who understand what they want, and then you tell them, here is how I am going to help you get what you want. Not, here is how I have decided your thing should look like. I'm not making decisions for you. I'm helping you. And this is, I think, something that designers really can leverage, because when you start thinking about the way that the business understands value, you start thinking about things like there's only really a handful of metrics. A lot of them are vanity metrics like number of views or NPS. They're not really important, but they are related to something important, because no one looks really at the metric and says, oh, our number went up from a 9 to a 9.1. That's incredible. It represents something. They're using the number to track something that is happening. They're using the number to track, for example, hey, we want people to buy more stuff. We want people to think of our brand as a valuable brand, and therefore we have this metric. And I think that this is why universal metrics don't exist. And when they do exist, they're useless because a metric you hire without thinking about what you want to measure is not giving you any value. But when you understand what you want to measure, and you have that metric, a designer can think about the thing you're trying to measure rather than the number itself. The number being too low or too high is not a real design problem. The design problem is what's causing the number to be too low or too high. And that's where you can come in and you can say, okay, here's your vision. Here's your vision for this new product. You believe users will do this. It's most likely not going to happen, but you don't tell them that. You tell them, okay, so what needs to happen for users to do this? Well, they need to go to this page. They need to click this link. What will motivate them to click the link? What are the behaviors that you can observe users do or not do? And how do you make them do more of the thing? And I think that once again, my experience in enterprise has really helped me appreciate this a lot more. People look at social media or e-commerce as examples of behavior nudging, and they're like, oh, algorithms are evil because they tell you to do something you wouldn't normally do. And I agree that in a lot of applications, like the Facebook algorithm, for example, it just keeps you scrolling, it keeps you clicking. You can sit there, you kind of look at the clock, like, well, it's been 2 hours and I've been sitting here just scrolling. And I haven't really accomplished anything. I don't feel better. I don't feel entertained. It's kind of, very fast food of you can just keep eating and you never feel satisfied. But that kind of behavior nudging, I think, gives a really bad rap to just the concept of make people do something, make it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. You brought up security as a really good example. And I think that password guidelines, things like that have been an attempt for years to make security successful at keeping hackers out and preventing information from getting out. And people hate it, and people will try to do everything they can to avoid a strong password. And we've finally gotten to a point where there are passkeys and there are password managers, and they're designed solutions to prevent people from having to do this thing they hate. And they make it easier to do the right thing, which is to have a strong password, and harder to do the wrong thing, which is to have a weak password. And that kind of behavior nudging, I think, is extremely valuable in all kinds of productivity tooling, where the goal is not to sell you something and the goal is not to show you ads. You already paid for the product. The goal is now to make sure you use it as effectively as possible. And you can start understanding what users are trying to do just by looking at their behaviors and being like, what are you doing? Why are you not doing this thing that we want you to do? And there's so many reasons that you can observe users not doing the right thing. A lot of it is incentive-based. A lot of it is familiarity-based, that, hey, the new thing is new and confusing and scary, and the old thing is familiar. And they've built rote expertise around what does it look like for me to take my next step in this workflow. And they have really specific markers they're looking for. And so a successful designer that is engaging with how teams define value can go back to their stakeholder and say, people are not doing this, not because the button is in the wrong place or we don't have this, the newest design system. It's because they're not seeing the markers of the next step. I think people used to call it information sent, and they stopped calling it that. And I'm not really plugged into, content design, so I have no idea why. But I have seen that content designers are extremely thoughtful about this. And content designers and user researchers, I think, are where the majority of the thinking about the next steps for our discipline is happening. And UX has kind of, passed on that torch, which I think is a huge shame.
Yeah.
And
I'm observing that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So for these reasons, I actually think that a lot of the best opportunities to do design are actually internal tools. And you will actually see on job descriptions for B2B tooling and for enterprise tooling, we want consumer grade design. And I think that the people who are hiring for those roles don't understand what makes design successful, because it's honestly extremely simple to design for consumer, because consumer workflows are so well understood. Every single insight about UX for the past 30 years has been e-commerce. Every single one. You go to the back archive of Nielsen Norman articles and do a count on your fingers of how many of them are not about e-commerce.
Yeah.
And it's going to take you a couple of years to run out of fingers because it's where the money was. It's where the early internet, was successful. Obviously, Amazon came out of that world, and tons of other companies as well. eBay, um, Craigslist, technically speaking, you sell things. It's a marketplace. Um, they're all e-commerce. It's a very well understood process, and you can just kind of figure out what are the best practices, and then you go and do them. But for B2B, those workflows are extremely hard. Do you think that Salesforce is like that because everyone there is stupid? No. Salesforce is like that because they're trying to solve extremely complicated workflows. They've tried to make essentially a development kit that solves business needs. And a lot of the time, those businesses haven't actually thought about what they need long
That's right.
enough. And they have all sorts of different teams doing that kind of work to hack their own solutions together. And people give up and they switch back to an Excel spreadsheet that they email back and forth. And I've seen that happen everywhere. I've seen that happen at Amazon. I've seen that happen at Bloomberg. Companies that are very well funded and they have all of this tooling and people don't use it. And so I think that internal tooling is such a great opportunity because you also have a captive audience. It's someone sitting in your building. Go down a couple of floors, buy them a coffee, and ask them. Ask them about their workflow. Ask them, can I watch you work? Nothing is confidential because you work for the same company.
I,
And
I, I love what you, sorry to interrupt you, but I love what you said about like, here's how I'm going to be helping you as your design partner. We often use the term like, I like to amplify the work that you're doing. I use that a lot. And then getting buy-in for that internal wiring. Um, B2B platforms, there's a lot of like siloed systems that are not communicating with each other, that are using different taxonomies, and with the evolution of AI now, having those taxonomies in place, having them unified across your systems so that everyone is speaking the same shared language and has the same shared understanding about where we should really be focused now, what people who are in sales on the ground talking with customers understand, so that that gets over to product and we understand the current experience and the problems worth solving and what solutions we want to actually ship and then measure. Like there's so much disjointedness there that we've neglected all these years while we pump out software. Uh, I see the opportunity there. Gaining the buy-in is sometimes difficult depending on, you definitely need a team of people. And I
yeah.
love your analysis of having a content designer and a UX researcher working together. I love working like that. I also like working with a customer experience support engineer. So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of taps a lot of the different um, areas where we need expertise to communicate well with each other.
Yeah, I think that there's the consumer design pattern of the user is external. I'm going to build empathy for the user. And I'm just going to do an aside because I hate that term so much. Empathy is such a great way of saying I know what the user needs, therefore we don't need to talk to them, of displacing the user, out of the room, like, oh, we freed up a chair, this is the chair where the customer sits. And I can speak for the customer as the customer proxy. And I can imagine what they want. Like it's so misused that I think most of the time it's actually a marker that someone is doing bad design whenever they appeal to empathy rather than actual research. And so I think that this kind of whole process of, oh, we need to build empathy where the customer is external, the customer is in some ways unknowable. It's an anti-pattern for enterprise and for B2B tooling and for internal tooling because the customer is knowable, the customer is down the hall. Bring the customer into your room, like literally a physical person. Don't pretend that you know what they want. They are the SME. They are the expert on their problems. And if you can design together with them, you are going to go much further than if you design without them, you bring this and they're like, what is this? I didn't ask for this. I don't need this. You invented problems that you thought I had. You solved those problems, but you didn't solve my problems.
Right.
And you
I'm
see
just,
that all
I
the
need to
time.
be able to forecast how to budget this service into my
Yeah,
business.
yeah.
And I can't rely on your pricing and packaging or something. Like, solve that problem for people, right? That
Yeah,
helps you make decisions, having the customer there.
yeah, it's like, yeah, if you have access to that person, they should be in the room when you're making these decisions as much as possible. The kind of the mirror to the designer having quote unquote empathy is, I think, the illusion that, oh, the product owner or the product manager is the user proxy, is the expert on user needs. That comes out of extremely early Agile. And if you read the Agile Manifesto, when it talks about the customer is the business. It's the person who comes to the IT group and says, we want you to build this. And you are done when you have built the thing they want you to build. And they say, oh, yeah, this works. So you can't do that with an internal user. Invite that customer into your process. But it's not the product manager. The product manager is not your user. If the product manager is making assumptions and they're, saying we need to build this, we need to build this, it's so easy to fall into the temptation of solving product problems that are not user problems. And it's extremely common to see developers solving, engineering problems that are not user problems. And designers think we are immune. We're not immune. I've seen so many designs that only solve design problems that are not user problems. No one cares about this except for you. And a lot of the time, no one will be able to tell the difference except for you. At the end of the day, none of those things have value. Users will look at them and say, okay, but this doesn't help me do the thing that I do with this product. And every single time Android updates the operating system. So I have a Samsung phone, and so I get kind of hit by the Android update and the Samsung update. And every single time they break something, that there's a new and improved redesign of just like a basic app like the stopwatch that I use. And they change something that like I can't use it that way anymore. And it's extremely unclear to me what the benefit was. That it doesn't feel better. It doesn't feel like, oh, cool, I can do something new now. It's just like, well, that doesn't work anymore. And I think that if you have the opportunity to talk to the actual end user of your product, you are going to avoid things like this. And what's more, you're going to create a champion. And quite frankly, I think that design is of the three functions of engineering and product and design is the smallest. Every single company, pretty much every single company. I mean, like, I guess Airbnb maybe is some kind of exception, but it's only because, Brian Chesky is the only PM really in the company and everyone else is just executing his vision. But in most companies, design is the smallest. And you need every champion you can get. And if you go around telling people that they're wrong and you're right, no one is going to listen to you. We are not the table by default. And as much as I hate the kind of the discourse of seat at the table, you need to get people to say, hang on, we need Kathy in this room because we can't make this decision without her, or her perspective will be valuable, or things like that. And a really great way of doing it, and I love that you brought up customer success, customer support as an opportunity for bringing that insight, because they are actually talking to customers every day. They can tell you about all kinds of problems that people are facing. And they're also a great function to have as supporters of what you want, because when you talk to an executive, you're like, we're solving this problem. The executive will turn to support and say, is this true? Is this a problem? How frequently does this happen? And you want that person to back you up. And even when you're not in the room, You want them to back up your perspective.
Yeah,
And the more you,
they want to solve that problem for the customers. Like
yeah,
they
yeah.
care a lot.
So I think that this is a really big thing in UX discourse that we are the ones like we on the product triad, on the desirable, viable, feasible. We own desirable. We are the ones who care about the user. No one else cares about the user. Engineers just want to ship features. Product managers just want to ship features. We are special. And like I've never worked with anyone who thought that way. Everyone wants to do a good job. Everyone wants to make a good product. If you think that everyone except you is stupid, then you're just not talking to them. You're assuming. And I think this is very rich for a profession that talks about our empathy all the time, that has no empathy for colleagues, to just assume that, hey, the things you want them because you want bad things. I want good things, therefore you are wrong, and therefore I'm right. And that's not a very productive relationship. It doesn't matter who's right. You're not going to get anything done. And at the end of the day, we have the least organizational political power. And if you're going to, if you're going to put a stake in the ground and say, I'm not budging, most likely you're going to be pushed. Yeah. But if you're working with other people in the organization, doesn't matter who they are, and they can back you up because you're creating value that they recognize, then you're in a much better position to say, well, I don't think this is the best way to deliver value to our customers. And our customers agree. There's one right now. I'm going to pull them into the room and like, hey, let's talk about the problems that you're facing. And I think that
my recent mantra is this. Tell me what you think of this. Map what's real, test what works, and act on insights. So you can bring that customer in. You also have a single source of truth at the map of where the problems are. And we're testing things and making insights actionable, creating good user experiences, not just shipping bits of product here and there, right?
And the reason I love that is because you're starting with mapping, map the landscape, understand all the possible opportunities for intervention, and acting is last. You're only acting once you understand where the leverage points are. I think a contrast would be the extremely common mantra of build, measure, learn. You start with build. Why would you start with build? It's ridiculous. Why build? So there's I forget who it was who said this. I think it was Tom Kerwin, but he said that the point in time that you know the least about your problem is when you're starting the development process. So why would that be the point in time when you start building? Building is expensive. Building is slow. By the end of the day, you will have made much more progress by looking at what is already known, by looking at either what can research tell you or what has research already told you in the past that is in a confluence somewhere that no one's really looking at because they think that the world started yesterday and no work is real except for the work they're about to do. Starting with build is ridiculous. There are things you can only find out by building, but the amount of those things is so small compared to the amount of things you can find out by talking to people. Yeah. And you really need to understand what it is you actually want to learn before you create an experiment. If you do build first and you put just like, hey, let's come up with a solution, let's do a thing, let's put it out there, and then you measure, what are you measuring? How do you know it's the right thing? Well, we're measuring what we need to find out. You don't know what you need to find out yet because your learn is the last stage. The first thing you need to do is figure out what you need to learn. And then you figure out how you are going to learn that. And sometimes that's going to be build. Most of the time, you don't need to build. And when you do need to build, you can build something extremely small, extremely narrow. I'm not even talking about working code in most cases. You can find out with a wireframe. You can find out with just text, shoot off a sentence to a person, they're going to come back and they're going to say, I have no idea what this means. This is a great way to test error messages, by the way. The majority of error messages give you no insight whatsoever because they're written by developers during the course of development. That like there's an edge case, no one thought about it. Oh, let's just write this error message. And it's just like, invalid parameters. Okay, cool. What do I do about it? How do I recover? Like 2001, Jacob Nielsen wrote the list of heuristics. I believe it's actually 96. Ages ago, over 20 years ago, he wrote this. And people still don't do it. But it's the simplest thing. If there's a problem, tell me how to fix it. At least tell me what it is. Don't just give me a pop-up that's like, critical whatever, and like a scary red exclamation mark.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Okay,
support teams really see this stuff. They're answering these questions when people hit these potholes in their experience. So they throw them over the fence to product to fix or design to fix. Oh, well, we'll get to that right now. That's kind of a brittle code base, or like there's reasons, but it's so frustrating when you really see something simple that could be improved not getting fixed, right?
there's a warning that's been bothering me so much recently. So I publish on Beehive, my newsletter. For a lot of very good reasons, I don't use Substack and I don't link to Substack. But Beehive is not as well funded, and the experience is not as good. And there's this error of just like, hey, you have custom styles in your in your post. And I'm like, well, what if I don't want that. I don't want custom styles. I didn't add them. I copy and paste from like Google Docs. And I think that's how it's introducing these custom styles. And it's like, give me a button to do something about it. But there's no button. It's just like, yeah, you have custom styles. Like if you want to remove them, go and find them. Like, and on the editor, it doesn't tell you what they are. And it's like, it's just this extra point of friction that is so easy to fix. And, I'm sure there's lots of reasons. Maybe there's other things they're focusing on, but it's just an example of how you need a warning message to be actionable in the same way you need a metric to be actionable. If any piece of information is not actionable, it's just distracting. It's like, well, what am I going to do about it? And I think most dashboards are useless for this reason. They give you a bunch of stuff. It's like, oh, cool. It's instead of a 9, it's a 10 now. Well, so like, am I the right person to do something about it? And if yes, what is that thing? Right. Is 10 a lot? Should it be 20? Should it be 1? If you don't have any of that context, it's like vanity metrics. Hey, look, I got 100 views on this. Well, that's okay, cool. What does that tell you? Nothing. It tells you nothing.
And that means what?
yeah, exactly. What am I going to do about it? It's just a number they put on your screen because they're like, hey, what numbers? And I think this is the key, I think, to build, measure, learn, and why it doesn't work. It's like, hey, well, let's build it. Okay, cool. We built it. What numbers do we have? What numbers does this produce? And this is something that I think a lot of people need to understand. Quantifying is not objective. It's a deliberate act where you choose what to measure and how to measure it. And if you just look at your prototype and you say, well, what are the numbers this produces? You're going to measure the wrong thing. And you're not going to learn anything because you're measuring the wrong thing. You're measuring what is easiest to measure. And just like, look, we got 100 views. Can we get 200 views next time? Well, maybe that's not the most important thing. Maybe the views don't matter at all, but it's easy to measure it. And so there you go. It's bam, it's on your screen. Figure out what you're going to do with it. And it's a distraction from, maybe a more useful metric that's more difficult to measure. For example, task completion. How many users gave up and failed and couldn't achieve their task? That's a super important metric. It's really hard to measure. Most of the time, it cannot be measured without a moderated test. You need a person there looking at what the user is doing and measuring it. It's hard to do. It's expensive. You need a professional. You need synthesis. Well, let's not do it. Let's just measure views. You just put it on a dashboard. It's automatic, but it doesn't tell you what you need to know. And so this is why I think, map the territory first and then talk to people and then act on the insights, act on the synthesis and not just sound bites. I think that is the correct sequence. If you have just sound bites, you have just validation. This is analogous to p-hacking in academic research. And p-hacking is essentially you need your p, your probability of this event happening, to be under a certain amount. So, if the null hypothesis is true, if we were wrong, it doesn't do anything, the chances of this happening is extremely low. And what some studies do is they run the test until p is low enough. And then they stop the test. And they say, look, it's statistically significant. And that's not necessarily telling you anything, because if you stop the test and we ran it 5 times and we got a statistically significant result, well, if you ran it 100 times, would it still be true? And a lot of times, no. The reason they stop it is because they know that if they keep running it, the results will not be statistically significant. And so validation is the same thing. Hey, we talked to 2 people, they both liked it.
Right.
Okay, well, first of all, that doesn't mean anything. I don't care if they liked it. But second, you're now stopping at 2 because you think that it's validated. And that's not a real insight. To have real insight, you need to talk to enough people to get enough of a diversity of perspectives, and then you do synthesis and you figure out, okay, what else are they saying? What is the between the lines in what they understand, what they don't understand, and then those are the insights. That's how you produce the insights, and then you act upon them. And this is something that I really introduced in my team at AWS. They didn't really think about it that way. They were the kind of team that'll put research transcripts into a word cloud, and they're like, yeah, users talked about, simplicity. They wanted it to be simple. Let's make it simple. It's like, well, that doesn't tell you anything. You can do this trick on anything where, users want it to be easier. And then you make you design a UI and you say, well, this is the thing we should build because it's easier and users asked for it to be easier. It doesn't mean anything. It's that the data didn't actually inform your design in any meaningful way. You're using the data as an excuse to do what you want to do in the first place. And so you're gathering the data, or you're processing the data in a way that creates an excuse. And that's not design. That's just malpractice, I think.
Yeah, I love how you're describing in your newsletter, in your work, in this conversation, you're describing how to bring tangible rigor and measurable impact to the work that we do in our roles as designers. But I think it's in our roles as, product managers or directors that are encouraging this type of rigor in our practice. I've sort of learned this kind of rigor through experience. I come to UX research through product design, and it's through my experiences working on products and working with people who are smarter than me and learning and being a continuous learner. And I have to say, following your writing, I feel like you're a great voice for me personally. I see a lot of my concerns or thoughts reflected in your writing, only better. So thank you for that. I've taken a lot of your time today to amplify the great work you're doing. Please, everyone, check out the product picnic at Beehive. The link is going to be in the show notes. So many great articles, really get you excited about the tipping point we seem to be at. Like there's a certain inflection point happening that you can be on the side of really great professional growth by learning about how to make impact and work together. Yeah, so thank you so much for your time today, and looking forward to continuing to read your writing and learn and grow from all of the incredible information you're sharing and your passion for our work. Thank you.
Thank you.